Welcome to Out of the Fold. My guest today is a former Pentecostal Christian who chose not to give her name. Her former church is derived from the day of Pentecost, seen as the birth of the Christian church, when the apostles were celebrating a Jewish harvest festival called Shavuot, and the Holy Spirit descended upon them. The sermons today are energetic, with people speaking in tongues, taking part in divine healing, and in rare cases, handling snakes and drinking poison. Some have died from the latter practices. Most Pentecostal churches in the United States can trace their influence and conception to the Azusa Street Revival, a series of religious services in Los Angeles from 1906 to 1915 that were led by William J. Seymour, a preacher from Louisiana who was the son of emancipated slaves. Since then, there has been a divide among Pentecostals between Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians, the latter of which resulted in oneness Pentecostalism, whose followers view God as a singular entity who manifests himself in different ways. To simplify it with an example, Trinitarians baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Non-Trinitarians baptize only in the name of Jesus Christ. No church, medical, or activist groups were contacted for comment on any of the content of this episode. The opinions expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. Our conversation began on a Sunday afternoon.
I was raised in a Pentecostal church in the Northeast. I was born in America, but my family is from India, which I think adds a level of complication to my story. When the area that I grew up in, there weren't a lot of non-Caucasian people around, and the area that my family is from is very heavily religious, but not necessarily Christian. A lot of them are actually practicing Hinduism or Buddhism. So when I was growing up, even though we went to a Pentecostal church and everybody I went to church with was white, I feel like a lot of the rules and restrictions that were placed on me weren't due to the actual religion of Pentecostalism, but was actually sort of like an Indian influence because of their Malayali background into Pentecostalism. Like I mentioned, my father is Indian, and he came into this church, I want to say around the late 1980s when he immigrated to this country. Mm-hmm. And he started out as a member. After some time, he became a pastor and would minister. And when the head pastor got kind of too old to start doing his role, my father stepped in and became the head pastor of the church.
Was he one of many pastors, or was he basically the church leader?
He was basically the church leader. From what I can recall when I was younger, there was like 2 or 3 of them. But after my father took over, I feel like it was basically just him.
And you had mentioned that basically having been from India, that sort of adds another level of complication to it. Would you say that's because of India in general, you know, the politics, the social situation, the religion, or is it more so specifically due to your family in wherever they were in India?
I think both things could probably play a piece into it. The way I always saw it as I was growing up is like my parents really didn't want us to act like we were Hindu. So there were a lot of things that in American culture are just things that people do, like wearing jewelry or going to the movies or putting on makeup or stuff like that, that American Christians do, and it's not a big deal and nobody even thinks about it. But my parents strictly forbid it for a long time. Like I wasn't allowed to get my nails done or wear any kind of makeup, wasn't allowed to have any jewelry other than like a watch. If they ever caught me with like a necklace or something like that, they'd take it away from me. And just there was just a lot of restrictions about stuff like that. But that wasn't imposed like, they're telling me all this, but I go to church and I see people wearing jewelry and they have makeup on and all this stuff, and it's kind of like conflicting for me, conflicting information, because I can see that other people that you say are Christians are doing it, so it can't be that bad, right?
So just to clarify, are you saying that your family saw, wearing makeup and wearing jewelry and all of that stuff, they would associate that with Hinduism specifically?
Yes.
Gotcha. How so?
I was talking to my cousin who's a little bit more knowledgeable about the subject, and he told me that actually the wearing jewelry and all that, it was supposed to be more about you're supposed to show that you're humble. So you don't wear jewelry because it shows that you have wealth and you're supposed to be humble, but people have taken it to an extreme to mean something completely different because they don't understand. Because, like, sure, I'm not allowed to wear jewelry, but my parents still had, like, nice cars and a house, and, they would brag about that stuff, but not allowed to wear jewelry.
Right. So how did that lead to, your family ending up in the northeast of the United States? And was he already a pastor in India as well?
He was. Yeah, he talks a lot about being in seminary in India and traveling all around and how hard it was.
Was he a Pentecostal preacher in India as well, or was it with a different denomination?
I don't really know the answer to that. Other members of my family don't seem to adhere strictly to Pentecostalism. So it's very possible that he was like a non-denominational Christian, or there's like some branch of Christianity out there that I don't know about that he was following.
Okay, so when you became involved with the Pentecostal church in the Northeast, were there really specific issues that they wanted to touch on, or was it kind of based on the whim of the leaders of the church?
It's hard for me to say because I grew up there, so I don't really know what other religions like talk about or like discuss. There was a lot of talk about like the end times. Like my father specifically dedicated like a group of sermons for like a year and a half basically about discussing Revelation and how the world is going to end and how we need to be prepared for it. I don't know, at a certain point I'm sitting there and I'm like, so we already know it's going to be bad. Do we really need to talk about it anymore?
So, one of the big reasons that I was really looking forward to talking to you about this is, I've seen the Pentecostal sermons before, and I mean they're incredibly intense, and I can imagine that if you were raised in that, and then you hold those beliefs to some degree for your entire life, whether it's based off of love of God or fear of hell in the end times or whatever it may be, I can only imagine that the process of losing your faith after having been enveloped by that for so long has to be, to some degree terrifying.
Yeah, I can say that that's true. Yeah, I haven't been speaking to my father for about almost 2 years now since I lost my faith. But losing my faith specifically, at first, it wasn't just like one day I was like, oh, God's not real. It started with like questioning certain aspects of what was being told to me. Like the first thing I remember specifically thinking that can't be right is when we were preaching or speaking up against gay marriage. And always in the back of my mind, as young as I can remember, I was always thinking, well, that can't be right. Like, I don't see what's wrong with gay people getting married. I don't see what's wrong with being gay. It's just the way some people are. But quickly realizing that that's not how the church felt, kind of keeping my voice quiet. And then like the thoughts of things like that just kept popping up. So by the time I was in high school, I was kind of thinking like, all right, I'm still a Christian, but like, I don't believe everything that these people that go to my church believe, because some of it doesn't make sense to me. And eventually it got to the point where I was like, I don't see how I can believe any of this. I don't even know if there really is a God. But I was still like going to church and sort of doing what my parents wanted me to do, just not specifically talking about what I believed or what I didn't believe or anything like that. Up until the point where I met my fiance, who wanted me to move to a different part of the country with him. And it was at that point when I had to tell my parents that I was leaving that all this stuff came out, and it was kind of like a big fight that we had, and we kind of had a falling out, and we haven't really spoken since then.
What do you identify as now religiously? I mean, when we're talking about people that are vegan or vegetarian, I mean, there are like 9 different types of vegetarian. Do you call yourself an atheist, agnostic? What do you call yourself, if anything?
I don't consider myself agnostic. I believe in I believe in like a sense of karma. Like I feel like the energy that you put out into the world will come back for you. But I don't ever want to tell somebody what they believe is wrong. Mm-hmm. So I can't definitively like feel like there really is no God and there's nothing that happens after death. But I feel like if there is a God, he's not any type of person or any type of being that religions make him out to be. Like they make him so pigeonholed and say like certain things about him when really none of it is true. Nothing can be known about him. If there is a deity up there that is watching everything that we do and controlling everything that we do, and asking them for stuff isn't going to make a difference in your life, whether you pray or not isn't going to make a difference, because that being is just doing what they're doing. They're not, you know what I mean? And you can't say that they're loving, but then they're also wrathful, and then they care about you, but then they also like, and part of this might be my line of work too, because I'm a nurse and I work in a pretty intense area of nursing, and I see a lot of traumatic, like terrible stuff that I don't think anybody could do anything to be so evil to deserve.
Would you be willing to share what type of nursing it is?
I specialize in neurology. I started out in neurological rehab, so like stroke patients or brain injury patients after their initial insult and sort of medically stabilized, we try to work on getting them back to as much of a functionality as you can. And just people with brain tumors, like they have so much hope, but like that at some point you can't rehab them anymore because like a tumor is eating away at their brain. And I feel like if there was a loving God that cared about everything, all people, he wouldn't put tumors in people's brains for no reason.
Right.
Now I work in neurological intensive care, so that can be a little traumatic as well, because I see people right when they have something happen, their families are all upset. I don't know if they're going to make it or not. I'm trying really hard, but like I feel like I'm going against whatever plan or whatever is supposed to happen. I feel like I'm just working against it futilely most of the time. So it just makes like working in the medical field, I feel like people who still have a faith, like a strong faith, believing in a good God, after that, they have like something incredible that I personally don't possess.
Was the process of you losing your faith, did that start with your profession, or was that something that you started to lose, and then this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back?
I'd say I started losing my faith in college before I started working. So I feel like it'd probably be more like the nail in the coffin, so to speak.
What sort of views did you have about some of the more common issues associated with religion? Like, when we talk about sex before marriage and LGBT anything, abortion and things like that. I mean, where would you be willing to share about your stances now versus where they were when you were a believer?
So that's an interesting question. Like I said before, I never had a problem with people being gay or bisexual or transgender or any of that, like any time in my life. And being told that I should have a problem with it is the first thing that made me kind of question why, what's wrong with it? Mm-hmm. Is this all really real? Abortion, in the beginning, like when I was in high school and college, I had a very pro-life stance because I thought that the fetus is alive and it's its own entity and you shouldn't kill it. But looking back on it now, I feel like that was a very naive position for me to take after going through school and working in the medical field for so long, because now that I see there's like two sides to life. There's like life, you're a walking, talking, thinking, emoting being, and then there's life, well, your heart's beating, but you're not really thinking, you're not really doing anything, you're not really conscious, and actually what kind of a life is that? So I changed my stance from being pro-life to being pro-choice, even though I have some like reservations about why people get abortions, but that's not really for me to decide. I just know I personally it would have to be like medically, I would be put way in harm from pregnancy for me myself to get an abortion, but I'm not judging other people for why they choose to get abortions.
So if I could just ask something real quick, the way that you just described the two different types of life, you described one as the thinking, doing, and then the other type was the kind that, is almost not, it's almost like just a shell. I'm immediately thinking about, what you do for a living, and it sounds like you're referring to somebody who, you were talking about brain tumors and everything, and like, how that could, and I'm not in any way saying that you're trying to say that that's, not a person. But it sounds like maybe your views on what a fetus is, or like the zygote or whatever that that becomes an actual fetus. It sounds like they might be kind of linked to you.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I just think that I've seen a lot of alive people that can't do anything, and they're sort of trapped in their bodies, and they're really, I personally feel like they're not really alive. It's not really like a good life for them. And I'm treating them, other people are treating them, they stay in a bed all day, all night, they can't move, they can't emote, they can't talk to me, they can't tell me what they want, they can't tell me what they don't want. And I feel bad for these people. I feel like nobody should live like this. And then I kind of transfer that thinking onto, well, yes, the fetus can live at like 20 weeks if it comes out prematurely, but there's a lot of medical science that has to go into keeping that fetus alive. And like, what is their capacity going to be at the end when they technically are at full term? Like, they're not going to necessarily be a fully thinking, emoting, functional human being.
There's been a lot of talk about that recently as well, with the right to die movement for people that are in chronic pain or it's like debilitating chronic pain, or have those chronic conditions where their quality of life is so low that they want to die, but there's no legality behind a doctor helping somebody to do so.
I think for the most part, I agree with it. I think that it needs to be fleshed out a lot more. I think we need to have a lot more conversations about like what qualifies somebody to be able to make these decisions, or what qualifies somebody else to be your surrogate and make these sorts of decisions. I just think it needs to be talked about a lot more. But I've, like I said, I've worked with a lot of people that I, my heart goes out to them, and I feel like anything is better than the way that they're living currently, and perhaps assisting them to a peaceful resting place is more compassionate than trying to keep them alive and doing all kinds of invasive procedures and painful medical things. It'd be better to just let them sort of pass on, even whether there is an afterlife or not.
I agree with everything you just said. I'm not saying that somebody should be able to walk into a doctor's office and say, I want to die, and then somebody will just be able to give them a shot casually like that. That's in no way what I'm advocating for. But has your view on all of that? You mentioned that you were pro-life when you were involved with the church and with your past views, and you are pro-choice now, but with reservations, which it's totally understandable. Was anything that you just talked about, with euthanasia, was anything like that discussed when you were when you believed what you believed, or with the church?
I don't think so. I remember like having brief discussions in school when I was a lot younger about euthanasia, but I don't think I ever brought it up with the church or with my family at all. Just judging from like my parents' views on other things, I feel like they would be against euthanasia, but I can't really say for sure.
No, I think you were going to mention it earlier, but how have your views on sex changed? Like, I've heard people say, like, when they're raised specifically Catholic, that like there are some kind of gray areas with sex, whether it's like relating to oral and anal sex, then it's not necessarily okay, but it's like an acceptable sin in a way. And then there are some people that are raised as just no premarital sex at all. How have your views on sex changed from the time that you had faith until now?
So when I was first being brought up, we didn't talk about sex specifically. I was made painfully aware that I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend until I got married, and that like boys only want one thing, but nobody ever explained to me what exactly that was until I hit around puberty age. And then learning about sex itself was kind of painful for me because I was always taught like, oh, babies are gifts from God. So in my mind as a kid, I was thinking people fall in love and then they pray for a baby and God will give them one. And discovering during puberty classes that that's not how it works at all was kind of like really painful for me. I guess because it made me just question, was I supposed to be here or not? And like my parents weren't really helpful with that time in my life. I think mostly because they didn't know what to say, but like it was just really hard for me. And then as I learned about it more and became more comfortable with it, it was sort of like implied that like sex isn't until marriage. But I kind of started thinking about it, and eventually I was like, well, if you have sex with someone, but before you're married, but you intend to marry them, maybe it's okay. And my first boyfriend was actually a pretty strong practicing Christian, and we did have premarital sex. And I thought it was okay, and it didn't seem to bother him until like sort of towards the end of our relationship when he effectively cut me off and said he didn't want to have sex with me anymore. And I was kind of like, why? And he was like, well, I feel like it's wrong. And I was kind of like, well, we've been doing it for a couple of years. Like, why is it so wrong now? Or what's going to make it better if we stop? And then as far as like oral and anal sex, those ideas made me uncomfortable when I was a lot younger. But as I've grown up, I've just gotten more and more comfortable with people like different things, and people like to do different things, and whatever people like, it's okay as long as everybody's a consenting adult and we all know when we need to stop and all that stuff. I don't think I've ever discussed those particular types of sex specifically with my parents, So I don't know what I'm sure that they'd be like, no, just straight Christian missionary vanilla sex. That's all that's allowed. But I've never discussed it specifically with them.
Yeah, so it sounds honestly more so like things like that were avoided, whereas things like the end times were a really prominent part of that church.
Yeah, we think more about the end than the life that we're living now.
So what was their view? What did they think was going to happen?
So they thought that the rapture would happen, and then the Antichrist would come and become like the president or the king of the entire world. I don't know how they think this is going to happen, but that's what they thought. And then there would be a war between angels and demons, and then there would be peace for 5,000 years on Earth. And I know that this is all in Revelation, but I never really paid a lot of attention to it because I think it all sounds a little bit ridiculous, personally. Because one of the things I always question is, but won't all the people be dead if there's like a war? Is the 5,000 years of peace because there aren't any humans anymore? Because like that makes sense, but I don't know why that's something we would be interested in.
Huh. Yeah. So did you at any point believe it strongly?
I did. When I was a kid and like an early teen, I did. I remember like waking up at night wondering if maybe the rapture had happened, and I was all by myself because all my family had ascended into the sky and they'd left me behind, kind of deal. And then like as I got older, I was like, all right, maybe it'll happen, but it just won't be so dramatic. And and then eventually I was like, this can't be, this isn't going to happen. Nobody's going to just ascend to the sky. It doesn't seem like something that would, I don't know. I can't really explain why I don't think that that's something that would happen, but the idea is a little ridiculous to me now. I don't see why the end of the world would be so dramatic with everybody ascending and then people looking for missing people and then like this whole war erupting between angels and demons, even though nobody believed in God before. Suddenly angels and demons are walking around and everybody believes in God. It all seems a little ridiculous to me.
It was almost like the over dramatic nature of it that made it seem literally unbelievable.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, like when I was growing up, a lot of fantasy things we were kind of shunned away from believing. Like if I wanted to watch a movie like Harry Potter, I wasn't allowed to watch Harry Potter. That's all fantasy. That all has like weird mythos and things behind it, kind of like the Bible does, but that's completely forbidden. And it's not anything that I would like start a religion about yet. Like this weird fantasy story about like everybody ascending into heaven and then there being somebody who comes and takes over the entire world and then, demons and angels fighting and all that doesn't seems real, really. I don't think so.
Was there anything mentioned in the church that was that wasn't as much fire and brimstone as it was, about love, about kind of positive things? I know, the Bible's full of both sides of things depending on where you look and how you interpret it. But did they go into any of the reasons to believe that weren't strictly based around just not going to hell and not missing the rapture and missing out on all of it?
I mean, I feel like all of the reasons I was given growing up to be a Christian were all about, well, what about when you die? What about when the end of the world happens? What's going to happen to your soul? Kind of a deal where you should be a Christian and be a good person so that at the end of your life, you go to heaven and you don't go to hell, which is this horrible, horrible place. But I just like in my church, they didn't specifically speak hate about gay people, but they did say that gay marriage is wrong, but we should still love these people, but we should vote to take their rights away, which doesn't make a lot of sense. There's also we did a lot of like community outreach in the church. And this was like an inner city church. So there was a lot of like homeless population, a refugee population. So we would like go out and like hand out tracts or have like a little concert in a public park area and hand out tracts and sort of preach. And it was sort of presented doing this out of love. But looking back on it, like I find if I'm a bystander to all this, I just think it's really annoying. Mm-hmm. It's really annoying that I'm walking in a park and you're like trying to push a track on me and talk to me about religion. I'm just trying to walk in the park. I don't really want any part of that.
Right. So what are your political views now? Like, would you call yourself Democrat or Republican or anything else? Or, how has that changed since your religious views have changed?
I've always liked to identify as independent, but these past couple of years, I find myself leaning very left, particularly from the 2008 or 2016 presidential election. I find myself leaning very left.
Out of curiosity, do you have any explanation, why there are so many people that believe so strongly, literally evangelical Christians that are so strongly, behind Donald Trump?
I don't. My father, who is an immigrant and a man of color and not a rich person by any means, and a pastor, firmly supports Donald Trump. And it makes absolutely no sense to me because not only is he like anti-immigrant and anti, small business and whatever, but he is not what I would look at and think, oh, this man is a good Christian man. Like, he's been divorced 3 times. He has very public affairs that everybody knows about. It's not a secret. It's not even questioned whether he had these affairs or not. There's tons of tapes and footage of him out there being an asshole to people. And this is just not someone that I feel like somebody who believes in Christian morals and is a good Christian can get behind. Yet so many people do, and it kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Has your father ever given you any sort of inclination that he would support somebody like that?
I mean, the impression I got growing up is that my family is Republican, even though my dad says he registers as independent as well. But when Bush was up for election, I kind of understood it because he's they presented him as this good Christian man who followed God and blah, 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 and he's from a good family and whatever. So I could kind of see being behind him. But I don't see why they're behind Donald Trump. It baffles me. I don't buy he's doing this to be a good person.
Right.
For America motif.
So I think that a big reason that a lot of people hold on to religion for so long is because it does kind of give them answers to a lot of these, a lot of life's questions. What happens when we die? Without that, what do you believe happens? Let's just start with when we die.
I don't know what happens when we die. I'd like to think that we go somewhere nice, or that our souls go somewhere nice. I really don't want to think that people go to what is described as a hell, but then again, seeing what happens in the world, sometimes you wish there was some kind of punishment after death for certain types of people. But as an agnostic and from just my personal views of life, I just can't say what happens after death. It could be nothing. Maybe all religion is true and there is something that happens. But either way, I'd rather experience what I'm experiencing now and make the most of this experience. And if I get to the next stage, and I'll figure it out at that point, what happens then.
Gotcha. How about, did you ever pray a good bit while you were still a believer? And did you ever do anything where where you sort of felt like you were communicating with God, and you'd sort of feel like you'd get some sort of a response, even if it was just a feeling? And do you do anything like that now? Whether it's just talking to the air or talking to nature or the universe or yourself, that gives you, the same or a similar type of spiritual feeling?
So the church I went to was very like heavily prayer focused. Like we had a meeting on Friday night that was just for prayer. Like you would just come to church and everybody would just pray. There was no sermon, there was no like songs or anything. It was just prayer. So that was something that was very like heavily taught to me as I was growing up, is that you need to pray about things. You need to pray about good grades. You need to pray about your health. You need to pray about the health of your family and all this stuff. And I did pray, but it just, as I was growing up, praying was just kind of like something that you did. Like, oh, we're having a meal. We have to pray before it. Oh, you're going to bed. You have to pray before you go to bed. Oh, you're going to school. Let's pray before you go to school so that you get there safely and whatnot. I can't ever say that I really felt like I was actually, maybe when I was younger, I felt like I was actually talking to God or to someone. But as I got older, I felt like it was just something we had to do before we were allowed to do the next thing. But on the other hand, Pentecostals are known for their speaking in tongues and believing in, all the words escaping me. They believe in like certain things that they're like abilities that God gives to you when you're like filled with the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. Like one of them is speaking in tongues, and like another one is the ability to heal people. Another one is like the ability to prophesy and see what's going to happen in the future, kind of deal. So when I'm growing up in a church, routinely people are just breaking out into random gibberish really loudly and like proclaiming it for the whole church to hear. And it became normal to me. But as I got older and I was trying to like get some of my friends to come to church, I realized like this is kind of off-putting. Mm-hmm. Like you're sitting in a sermon and everything's all fine and dandy, and then suddenly somebody starts yelling in a random undistinguishable language, and you don't know what they're saying, and everybody is just acting like it's normal.
Yeah.
And like at a certain point, I think my parents wanted me to have this experience and were like trying to push me there, but like it never really happened for me.
With what you believe or don't believe now, or are questioning now, however you want to put it, how do you, when you think about that, how do you explain them doing those things?
To put it in layman's terms, I feel like people are just on a mental high, so to speak. Like you're in a group of people, you're all praying, and the energy in the room is really strong, and you just feel all these emotions and feelings welling up within you, and you've kind of seen other people do these things, so you feel the urge to start doing them, and hopefully you feel comfortable enough, and you just start doing it.
Yeah.
And like another reason why I identify as agnostic is I don't want to tell somebody, oh, this is all just in your head. This is all mental. Like there is no God. You're just a mental case. And that's why you do this, is because you're crazy. Because I don't think that. I think people really do have these profound experiences that make them feel closer to God and make them filled with a spirit that makes them, like they feel good about it. It makes them feel okay in a sense. And I don't want to tell people that that's not actually what's happening. You're wrong. So it could be that this is all actually happening and I'm just missing out because I'm the logical one that's just sitting here like, what is going on with all these crazy people talking in weird languages? As far as the healing portion goes, I can think of specifically, there was an older lady that went to our church that had really bad Parkinson's disease. And this is when I was a lot younger. And she was gone for like a long time. And they told me she was really sick and, that I need to pray for her and whatnot. And then eventually she came back to the church, and they told me it was a miracle and that she was healed by God, and that, this is proof of miracles and whatnot. But later, when I'm in college and I'm in nursing school and I'm learning about drugs, I realize they just put her on different meds to make her Parkinson's disease not that bad. That's what happened. She wasn't healed. She just found a medication regimen that was working for her.
Yeah. So I don't actually think I've got any other questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to share?
I think I just wanted to mention about how I feel like my father being a pastor and being in this religion kind of influenced his personality a lot. Like, he was very aware and sort of ashamed of everything us kids were doing, because I have 2 younger siblings. I have a younger sister and a younger brother, and everything we did was a big deal. And mind you, none of us got into drugs or did anything life-threatening so bad that police had to be called or anything like that. But every little thing, when I rebelled and started wearing jewelry, it was a big deal. What are people going to think? How am I going to be able to evangelize to people or bring people to God if my daughter is doing this thing, kind of deal. That heavily influenced his personality and how he parented us. And I feel a lot of that is what also drove me to not wanting to believe so much, because I don't feel like that was necessary, or I don't feel like that sort of fear he had of what everybody else thinks about him as a leader because of what his children are doing was helpful to us growing up. I feel like he was more focused on being a pastor a lot of the time than he was on being our father, in a sense. I don't ever want to say I'm against any type of religion as a whole. There are definitely certain branches or certain churches, specifically what comes to mind is the Westboro Baptist Church, that I am adamantly these people shouldn't be allowed to talk about what they believe in. These people shouldn't be allowed to go on TV and talk about what they believe in, because it's damaging for society. But I don't ever want to tell somebody what they believe is wrong, simply because I don't believe in it. So I do worry that maybe sometimes I'm a little bit too anti-religion, but I don't ever want to tell anybody that their religion is wrong.
But you think internally, that you are somewhat anti-religion? You respect people, but you don't necessarily respect beliefs. That's just sort of what I'm picking up.
I mean, I guess you could say that. I read on the subreddit that you found me on, I read a lot of stories about people saying oh, I just came out as an ex-Christian to my wife, or oh, I just came out as an ex-Christian to my husband. And that it kind of strikes my heart a little bit, because I can't imagine being in a marriage with someone who doesn't have the same beliefs that you do. You're agnostic and they're Christian. I feel like there's going to be a lot of conflict in your household because of your 2 very different beliefs. But if I were to have children and one day my kids come up to me and they say, I want to start going to this Pentecostal church because I really believe in what they're preaching, I'm not going to tell them no.
Right.
But when they start coming to me and saying, Mom, you should come too. Mom, why don't you believe in God? Don't you know you're going to hell? I don't know how I would mentally deal with that, or find an appropriate response to that.
Okay. Sounds good. All right.
I don't know if that really answers your question. I'm sorry.
It totally does. No, it does. And I was just picking up on, the way that you talked about it and everything. You don't sound angry. You just sound you sound as though there are enough holes in it, and that it kind of has led to enough people that you've known having these really damaging views. It just sounded like it might be understandable to, not only be somebody who doesn't believe it, but to be, not the type of person that would like scream at a Christian on the sidewalk or anything like that. But if really pressed, you would say that like I would have no problem with Christianity being outlawed if that were something that came up.
You mean like the opposite of the Handmaid's Tale? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I think that religion is important to society in a way, like helping it to develop, because I feel like we as humans make this stuff up because we need to give ourselves a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's important in that sense that you can't just outlaw it. But you could say that I harbor some form of resentment towards being brought up a certain way inside of it. But I have plenty of friends or even my own cousins who were brought up the same way, and they don't have any regrets about it. And they don't feel the same way that I do. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. The last thing she said reminds me of a Buddhist parable. A traveler arrives at a large body of water. He can't find a way across, so he makes a raft out of what he can find around him. He paddles across to the other side, and he questions what to do with the raft. He decides to leave it, because he only needed it to get across the water. My previous guest, Morris, has an unfriendly view of Mormonism now, but he's thankful for the fact that he had a healthy youth because of it. Mormonism was the raft that got him to adulthood without as many scars as his peers, but when it was no longer useful, he let it go. As I thought about what my guest today said, I agreed with it more and more. Maybe I'm wrong about some of the things I've said previously. Like if I were raised secularly, I would know not to kill and steal because of the golden rule. There is statistical evidence that the more orthodox a religion, the less likely its followers are to commit a crime. On the other hand, 90% of prison inmates identify as religious. But the research into the correlation between religiosity and criminality is still in its infancy. And honestly, I'd probably join a religious group too if I were in prison, if I felt like it would help me to survive, alleviate boredom, or get out sooner. So let's focus on the practical. I'm certain I wouldn't have made this show if it weren't for my religious upbringing. Also, when I contemplate existence, the idea of the universe being billions of years old and life as we know it just being a blip in its history doesn't fill me with dread. It makes me question things to which I believe a potential God would want people to seek answers. This is a big reason I take issue with the restrictions that the parents of my guest today placed upon her. If Harry Potter risks turning someone apostate, that's not because of Harry Potter or the student, but the teacher or the teaching itself. Truth does not get weaker through learning about things contrary to it. It makes it stronger because it will still be proven true and there will be one more argument in its favor. If that doesn't happen, then it was never the truth to begin with. When I realized I didn't accept God in the way I was raised to believe, truth became my ultimate goal, and I feel spiritually fulfilled because of it. I'm thankful for religion, for opening my mind to the questions that got me here, but I believe that was its only purpose. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. If you'd like to be interviewed for Out of the Fold, feel free to contact me on Twitter at OutFoldPodcast, or you can email me at outofthefoldpodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks to my guest for approving all of this conversation being shared. Logo and artwork by my wife. Production by me and my wife. All music by me. Until next week, this has been Out of the Fold.